All right, so let's continue our discussion of the apology. So in the last lecture, you saw Socrates' actual defense against the charges brought against him, and those were interesting arguments, but overall, there's something much more important happening in the apology. Right, so here we have our more important theme that's underlying everything Socrates is saying in the apology. So roughly what Socrates is doing here throughout the sort of underlying theme is that in order to live the good life, we must care for our soul. And we can care for our soul by practicing philosophy and gaining wisdom. That might not sound intuitive to you yet, but hold on to it, right? Sit with it for a second and listen to Socrates' defense of this. But here's the textual support if you're the type of person who likes to go back and read these things in the text. So Socrates says, I say that it is the greatest good for a man to discuss virtue every day and those other things about which you hear me conversing and testing myself and others, for the unexamined life is not worth living for men. Okay, so he thinks we can live a good life by gaining knowledge, by examining life, by seeing what makes life worth living, and we can sort of do this through practicing philosophy and gaining wisdom. Now, you're probably a little baffled, right? How does this make sense? Initially, it seems just clearly false, right? And this doesn't depend on whether or not you believe in the existence of the soul. So Socrates is obviously saying we need to care for our soul, but if you don't believe in the soul, replace the word soul with your character or something like that, right? What we should be caring about is taking care of ourselves, our being, our character, our soul, whatever it is, right? That you are, you should be taking care of that. But still, it seems unintuitive, right? He's making the claim that the best life for you to lead is one where you focus on gaining knowledge or wisdom about the virtues. Our society doesn't act this way, right? Pretty much most of the ideal lives our society sort of promotes don't deal with gaining knowledge about the virtues. And they'd say, okay, you need to wake up and get that bread, right? You need to search for money. You need to search for pleasure. We should be working toward comfort or excess. And it's not that our society only touts materialistic things, right? But that's a heavy portion of it, right? So don't care about knowledge. Go for the materialistic things. But then even if it's not materialist, some people say, okay, well, we should be searching for family and friendship and meaningful relationships. We should be caring for the aesthetics of our body, so on and so forth, right? We should care at least about family and friendship more than we should about gaining wisdom. But Socrates says, no, still, that's not the case, right? Wisdom comes first, right? Not these materialistic things, family, friendship, relationships, so on and so forth. So our society definitely doesn't agree so far with Socrates, right? We put all of these other things normally before simply gaining virtue. Now, remember, Socrates isn't saying abandon all of these other things. He's saying they should be secondary to you gaining knowledge or wisdom about the virtues. Right, so family, friendship, pleasure, comfort, those are still all important things. They're just less important than knowledge or wisdom about the virtues. But still, our society doesn't even seem to agree with that claim. Right? So how are we going to make sense of what Socrates is saying? Well, here's a little bit more depth here, right? So Socrates believes that when we search for the truth about the virtues, it transforms our soul or our character so that it functions in the way that underlies the good life. In other words, when we gain wisdom about how to act appropriately in moral matters, we become virtuous. And when we're virtuous, we're good and we lead a good life. So inspecting the truths about the world, right? Finding out this knowledge about wisdom, this wisdom or knowledge about virtue sort of transforms our character so that we only act from that wisdom about virtue. And if we're only acting virtuously, then we're only acting in ways that are good, and so we're going to lead a good life. At least that's the rough idea. He's going to have to fill in some blanks here, but take this into the present day. Here's just sort of a quick little thought experiment, a little poll for you to take, right? Which of the following lives do you think would be better to live, right? If you had to choose between A and B, which would you prefer to live? A life where you're just sort of going through your routine every day. You don't really question why you're in school, or why you wake up and go to this job, or why you either don't like relationships or are in a relationship, so on and so forth, right? You're not questioning your routine. You're not questioning the things you're doing with your life. But, I mean, your life is pleasant enough. It's not like you hate your life. You're enjoying it. But you've never actually questioned if any of the things you're doing are important or worthwhile. And B is a life where you actually examine the worth of everything you're doing, right? You're trying, at least, to live in accordance with the values that you find are worthwhile. And yeah, you're going to get frustrated because it's hard to live perfectly in accordance with the values that you deemed worthwhile, and it's difficult, but at least you know, right, that this life is either worth living or not worth living. Socrates thinks everybody would choose B. Socrates wants to say, when he says the examined life, the unexamined life is not worth living, that those people who don't examine their lives are simply going through the motions. They don't understand the meaning of life. They don't understand what is valuable. They're just sort of robots. They're just sort of animalistic. They're going through the day, but they're not actually taking control of their life. And so when you examine life philosophically, that's when you get to live a life where you're aware of what's valuable. You can see, you can look out into the world and see, okay, this course of action is actually meaningful. This course of action isn't. And so I can lead my life, or at least try my best to lead my life in a way that's valuable. Right? So maybe, here there are two lives in front of you. One is you get your degree and you become as intelligent as is possible for you. And another is where you just go flip burgers all day. But, I mean, you got enough money to pay your bills and it's pleasant enough. Right? Socrates is going to say, if you don't ever examine your life, you might just be fine with flipping burgers and never, like, advancing your own personal self. But once you examine life philosophically, you'll see the life in which you better yourself is actually a life that's more worthwhile. It's worth living. And so you can actually direct your actions to realize that. The person who doesn't examine their life will never change their actions to live with what's valuable. They don't even know it's there in the first place. Right, so that's roughly what Socrates is saying here. And once again, we have some textual support for those of you who like to see directly in the text where this stuff is coming from. And so here's three sort of quotes proving what I've been claiming about Socrates. Right? So even now, I continue this investigation as the God bade me, and I go around seeking out anyone, citizen or stranger, whom I think wise. Then if I do not think he is, I come to the assistance of the God and show him that he is not wise. And why would this be important? Because they haven't properly examined their life. They think they're wise about something and they're mistaken. And so only by eliminating this mistake can they live sort of within the truth. Can they figure out what the correct life is to lead? So Socrates is going around helping them, right? He's saying, look, I'm going to help you examine your life so you're no longer living through falsehoods. For I go around doing nothing but persuading both young and old among you not to care for your body or your wealth in preference to, or as strongly as, for the best possible state of your soul. And so there's some proof that those things are valuable, right? Your body and your wealth, but you should never prefer them over the best possible state of your soul. You should never prefer them over knowledge. And then finally, are you not ashamed of your eagerness to possess as much wealth, reputation, and honors as possible, while you do not care for nor give thought to wisdom or truth, or the best possible state of your soul? So clearly, Socrates thinks, right, the best possible state of your soul, through gaining wisdom and truth, is clearly more important than all of these other endeavors we could be engaged in as human beings. Okay. So just a couple, I think, interesting implications of this view, right? If one agrees with Socrates, then it's going to imply at least two things. And these two things make a lot of sense of the apology, right? Because Socrates is just sort of laughing in the face of death. He's saying, I don't care about this sentence of execution, right? I'm going to stick to my values. I'm not going to beg you to like let me out or let me off easy, right? Whatever it is you think I've done, I don't care. Death isn't scary for the philosopher, he's claiming. Right? And what you are doing, city of Athens, right? All of you in the assembly, putting me to death unjustly, that's not going to harm me. It's only harming you. All right, so the first implication, we shouldn't fear death. Some text here. You are wrong, sir, if you think that a man who is any good at all should take into account the risk of life or death. He should look to this only in his actions, whether what he does is right or wrong, whether he is acting like a good or bad man. To fear death, gentlemen, is no other than to think oneself wise when one is not, to think one knows what one does not know. So what's he saying here? Right, well, we should only fear those things that we know can harm us. Right? Otherwise, why are you fearing it, right? If you don't know whether it harms you or makes you better off, you shouldn't fear this thing. So we should only fear that which can harm us. And if we think about death, well, you'll realize you don't really know whether it's good or bad. Death could be the best thing that's ever happened to you, or, I mean, it could be pretty terrible, right? If you're a theist who believes in heaven and hell, that's clearly the case, right? Death could be the best thing that's ever happened to you if there's heaven. If you've been bad, then death could be the worst thing that's ever happened to you. Or if you're somebody who thinks that nothing happens afterward, then death could be good because it's finally like an absence of the pain you get in life. Or if you believe in reincarnation, death could be great for you, so on and so forth, right? So you don't know whether death is good or bad. And so if we don't know it's bad, then we shouldn't fear it. And especially if we don't know it's bad, then we shouldn't let it scare us from doing what we know is right. That's the important point for Socrates here, right? They're saying, look, if you don't give up philosophy, if you don't give up this search for the truth and wisdom about the virtues, then we're going to put you to death. And Socrates says, well, why should I care about that, right? Death, I don't know if it's going to hurt me, but I do know that if I abandon my values, that is going to make me a worse person. Right? The threat of death should not stop you from doing what you know is right, Socrates claims. Okay, and then the second interesting claim is that we cannot be harmed by the actions of others. Now that sounds crazy at first, right? So here's what he says. Neither Melitus or Anytus can harm me in any way. He could not harm me, for I do not think it is permitted that a better man be harmed by a worse. Certainly he might kill me, or perhaps banish me or disenfranchise me, which he and maybe others think to be a great harm, but I don't think so. I think he's doing himself much greater harm doing what he is now, attempting to have a man executed unjustly. So what does he have in mind here? Well, if all that's really important is caring for your soul or caring for your character, and you do that by acting virtuously, well, then what other people do can't hurt you, right? Other people cannot hurt your virtuous actions. They can do evil things toward you or at you, right? They can put you to death. They can assault you. They can take your possessions. But they can't actually ever do anything that would harm your soul or character. Only you are capable of doing that, right? Only when you do something vicious or evil or immoral do you harm your character or soul. When somebody else does something vicious to you, they don't hurt your soul or your character. They hurt their own soul or character. So you can't be harmed by others. So Socrates, once again, is not scared of this punishment that the courts and Melitus are pushing on him, right? The punishment cannot truly harm him because the punishment cannot corrupt his soul. But here's the important point again, right? If Socrates were to abandon his values, if he were to give up doing philosophy, give up this search for wisdom about the good life, just to avoid punishment, then he would truly be hurting himself, right? He would be abandoning the good life to avoid something which he doesn't really think can hurt him. Okay. So we still need to do a little bit more parsing out here of what's going on. How does this knowledge regarding the virtues actually make you become virtuous, right? So Socrates is saying, look, knowledge will help you lead a good life. But we have people right now who think they know what the right thing is to do, but still act in an evil manner. So We'll finish that up next time. Thank you, everyone.